Another year, 10 more shows to talk about. I actually watched 13 this time, but I limited it to 10 because that's what we list makers usually do. Well, actually, it's more because one of them is embarrassing to talk about, and I only watched a few episodes of the other two. Of course, it's also because I didn't enjoy those as much as the 10 shows on this list, which is surprising considering what my number 10 is. Number 10 is also a bit embarrassing to admit I've watched, but I talked about it last year, so I might as well talk about it again. I must warn everyone that I will be spoiling every show on the list, so if you don't want to get spoiled, see if there's a show in this video that you won't mind hearing about. That's it for the intro, let's move on to the list. Number 10, 13 Reasons Why Season 2. This show takes the number 10 spot yet again. I think I enjoyed this season a bit more than the last one, but it still wasn't very good, and even more importantly, it wasn't needed. I mean, the book stopped where season 1 ended, so why make more? The show has a redundant title like 13 Reasons Why anyway, which by the way means that every season must have 13 episodes, even though that concept was only relevant in the first season. It could have easily been cut down to the traditional 10 episodes, or preferably less. Still, the mere fact that I was invested enough to watch through all those 13 episodes is reason enough to put it on the list, unlike the shows that I didn't finish. I will say that this season did improve on quite a few characters, especially Kevin Porter and Justin Foley, who were very sympathetic and showed good development. Some characters got worse unfortunately, most notably the main character Clay Jensen, and that's largely due to him obsessing over Hannah, who's annoying as usual. All this being said, I'll probably continue watching the show because it's a good way of ensuring a complete top 10 list by the end of each year. As I alluded to, Justin Foley and Kevin Porter were my favorite characters this season, and while it's hard to choose which one I liked better, I think I'll have to go with Justin. I found myself really feeling for this guy with how he's been mistreated by his stepdad and forced to leave his home. It was satisfying seeing him become confident enough to face his ex, Jessica, and even getting back together in the end. I want to talk about Kevin Porter too, so good thing my favorite episode of the season focused a lot on him, which was episode 9, The Missing Page. When Porter said he would change the school for the better earlier in the season, I didn't really believe him, but the trial scene of this episode proved that he meant everything he said. It was super emotional, and I was moved by his performance. He definitely improved a lot since season 1. Number 9. Better Call Saul Season 4. Better Call Saul has always been good, but also excruciatingly slow. I know Breaking Bad was too, but I was way more invested in it for some reason, whereas my sole reason for watching the spin-off is to know what happens next in the Breaking Bad universe. It's not a complete slog though, and some of the characters and plot points makes it fun. This season was mostly about Jimmy dealing with his brother's death, and also not dealing with it. It was also about getting permission to become a lawyer again, and his brother's death was actually the key to that. Don't know how to feel about that. I'd expect Jimmy to be more considerate, but then again, Chuck was a cunt. On Mike's side, it was basically about building the eventual meth lab that Gus owns, which was interesting in its own right, regarding the German engineer in particular. I don't know where I would rank this season, but it's probably not my favorite. What was my favorite, however, was Mike Ehrmantraut, who's my favorite character in the whole series, which includes Breaking Bad. He used to be number 5, but after rewatching Breaking Bad with my mom, he managed to reach the top, and it's not hard to see why. He's extremely badass and smart, but also caring and endearing. I liked his relationship with Werner Siegler this season, and it's a shame Mike had to kill him, but I'm glad it was Mike who carried it out, regrettably so. The best episode must have been episode 8, Kushada, as it was incredibly funny and well thought out. The way Jimmy got Huel out of jail was absolutely ingenious, prank calling the lawyer who was against Huel about some religious shenanigans. Jimmy can really do a good priest impression. Number 8, Westworld Season 2. This is the first time I've talked about Westworld on this channel. I'm not much of a fan of the series, but I found its first season really good. Season 2 wasn't as tightly written, but it was still pretty good too. It was cool how they used a lot of different languages, forcing me to read the subtitles. It was a good way to flesh out the world even further and see the variety of cultures this show addresses. The reason this show is so low on my list is because of its slow pacing. That's a common denominator with my bottom 3, which is because that's typical of live action shows. Granted, I do love the hell out of Sherlock, Stranger Things, Breaking Bad and Game of Thrones, but they have something special about them that these 3 shows unfortunately lack to me. I still think some of them are really good, but I just don't enjoy watching them all that much. It might be because I don't care much about the characters, but there are some that I like, such as... I did not expect to like Ikecheta as much as I did, as he was just a nameless character you'd expect to be nothing more than a killing machine. but this season really made him the best character, maybe of the entire show. His story is so fascinating. He was one of the creations who realized how Westworld works, and his mission to reunite with his lover was extremely powerful. My favorite character is highly related to my favorite episode, which was obviously episode 8, Kiksuya. It's amazing how an episode dedicated to some random character instead of the main plot worked this effectively. I mean, it's the highest rated episode of the season on IMDb, which makes me really happy. It's a huge contrast to Stranger Things' own standalone episode, which got a lot of hate. Even when this episode was sort of a filler, they did a great job connecting it to the main plot, with how Akecheta became important in the final 2 episodes, and especially the twist that Maeve was speaking to her daughter through him, which was all kinds of epic. The scene with Robert Ford was also great, and the callbacks were super well done. Number 7. Castlevania Season 2. For some reason, it took me a year to finish the first season of this show, which is crazy given how it was only 4 episodes. I watched the first and stopped midway into the second episode. I rewatched those 2 a year later, and finally finished the season altogether. I liked it, but it obviously needed more for me to get properly invested in it. That's exactly what Season 2 did, with twice the amount of episodes offering twice the amount of intrigue. It expanded the series, not just by episodes, but by characters as well, that were all really interesting. The art and direction was beautiful as usual, which might be the show's strongest aspect. The guy behind this series really should adapt Berserk into a proper anime. I'm pretty sure my favorite character was Isaac, as he was tragic, loyal, and badass at the same time. I didn't expect one of the villains to be so sympathetic, and neither did I expect him to manhandle another villain. This character has a lot of potential, so I'm interested to see where his character goes next, both mentally and geographically, as his beloved master is dead and he's currently in the middle of a desert. Of course, the best episode of the season, and the entire show for that matter, was episode 7, For Love. Talk about an amazing fight, with brilliant directing and emotional payoff. I didn't expect Dracula to be killed off so soon, but they did it in such a beautiful way that I'm content with it. Without this episode, I might have put Castlevania lower on my list, which goes to show how important it was. By the way, Alucard shares my name, Adrian. Just had to mention that. Number 6. The Dragon Prince Season 1. I was really looking forward to The Dragon Prince and had high expectations, as the head writer of Avatar The Last Airbender is behind it, and as most can agree, that show is excellent. So it's unfortunate that this show didn't live up to the hype. But then, this is only its first season, and I bet it'll get better as it expands. Yeah, I didn't think the world was expansive enough, which was promised from the very first scene of the show. The characters were fine, but they're far from some of my favorites. Also, I have to address the true controversy of the show, that being the art style and animation. I wish it was 2D animated, but 3D isn't that bad. As for the animation, yeah, the low frame rate was bothersome, but I got used to it. It was overall a good season that didn't quite live up to my expectations, but it's set up for what I assume is going to become a thrilling journey, so that's why it's near the middle of the list. I think my favorite character was Callum, if only because he's voiced by the guy who does Sokka. Well, he was pretty funny too, and he got some depth later on. It's cool that he's not a typical prince and learns to use magic instead of swords. He's good at drawing, so it makes sense that he would become a good magician that requires drawing symbols. I admit he was annoying at times, but I guess that goes for most characters and is part of the process for eventually becoming great. It's hard to decide what episode was my favorite between 1 and 3, but I think I have to go with 3, Moonrise, as it had great action and directing. It was definitely the most exciting episode, and it had a chilling ending, confirming the king's death without showing it. Unless he's alive, that is, but that would be a good twist. Number 5. Star Wars Rebels Season 4. Last year I put Star Wars Rebels at 9th, and I think I would put it at 8th now, because it wasn't that bad. Sure, I didn't like the first half of Season 4 that much, but the second half of Season 3 was pretty solid. Either way, the series saw a major improvement in the 4th season's second half, and it was a great way to end the series. There weren't that many episodes, but pretty much every episode had something to offer, with big emotional impacts and clever twists. The way they brought Ahsoka back was pretty cool, and Off and Kanan led to some interesting consequences. Overall, it was an exciting conclusion to the show that ended better than the Clone Wars, at least for now. I usually say Sabine Wren is my favorite character, but she didn't do much these last episodes, which speaks to its quality with how it didn't even need much of her influence in order to be great. Surprisingly enough, Ezra was my favorite, who I've never really cared for much before, but especially in the final he felt really mature and did some great things like accepting Kanan's death, letting go of his family, and defeating Admiral Thrawn while also sacrificing himself. Like I said, the episodes were great, but even so, I think the final was my favorite, which was episode 15, Family Reunion and Farewell. Like I said, Ezra really came through this episode, and I liked the other stuff that happened as well. I especially liked the epilogue, which saw an older Sabine, and also Ahsoka, who will go on an adventure to find Ezra again. Also, that final shot of the painting makes for an excellent wallpaper. Number 4, South Park Season 22. 2018 was the year I got completely invested in South Park. I had watched many episodes before, which I realized when I went through the whole series, but I had never watched it all chronologically, and there were many episodes I hadn't watched at all. Since the show has 297 episodes as of now, it was quite the endeavor, but I managed to watch it all in some months. South Park is one of my favorite shows ever, but I have to say this season wasn't all that fun. I liked it more than Season 21, but I don't think the show has been that good since its peak with Season 19, where almost every episode was excellent. The episodes in this season were fine for the most part, but nothing special, so this season being my 4th favorite show this year says quite a lot about my enjoyment of the show in general, despite weaker seasons. Still, I wish I could put it higher. This season was pretty much about change. The Marsh family got a new home, Mr. Hankey got banished from the town, Butters became more of an upstanding guy, the friendship of the four was starting to become less relevant, and Cartman doesn't seem like much of an asshole anymore, except for when he used the Buddha box. There's even an ongoing joke about cancelling South Park, which was written in pretty well to be honest. My favorite character this season was probably Randy Marsh. Sure, he wasn't the most active, but he did some funny things. He was the reason his family moved, which was an excuse to invest in weed business. He was especially great in episode 4, which was all about integrity, and him teaming up with Towley was pretty badass. I think the best episode was the season final, episode 10, Bike Parade, which did a tremendous job at wrapping up the plot points of the season, with the bike parade, the change aspect, and the cancelling joke. It wasn't without its funny moments either, which is South Park's biggest appeal. I might not like the emphasis on continuity all that much in these latest seasons, but when it works really well, which was already proven by season 19. Number 3, Voltron Legendary Defender, seasons 5 to 8. Voltron's schedule continues to impress me, with this year getting 4 seasons this time instead of 1 or 3, and even managing to conclude the same year. That said, I preferred the shorter seasons, those being 5 and 6. It felt like 7 and 8 had a lot of unnecessary episodes, and I know Season 2 had the same amount of episodes, but that season managed to have consistent pacing. Season 7 and 8 were also written a bit strangely, with Voltron gaining even more super armor, a questionable attempt at queerbaiting, and the handling of a certain other relationship. Seasons 5 and 6 on the other hand were both excellent with some of the best moments in the series. The Pidge family reunion was satisfying, the reprogrammed robot was hilarious, Lotor was cunning, and the Shiro and Keith moments were heartbreaking. I still really like Season 7 and 8, and I even like the final, which a lot of people hated, but they're definitely not up to par with the previous seasons, aside from Season 1, which is undoubtedly still my least favorite. My favorite character was probably Lotor, who proved himself to be an excellent manipulator. He sure fooled me. He fooled me because I liked him so much as a good guy, but that's not to say that I didn't like him as a bad guy too. On the contrary, he made for an excellent one, and he had understandable motives. I thought he was going to be brought back in Season 8, and was a bit disappointed that he wasn't, but that just goes to show how much I like that guy. He's definitely my second favorite Voltron character, Pidge being my favorite of course. I underappreciated some Season 6 episodes when I first saw them, because I was super tired while watching them, but they're definitely some of the best in the series, and I'd rank them way higher if I rewatched the show, but I still have to go with episode 2, Blood Duel from Season 5, since it was all kinds of epic. First of all, the exchange scene between Lotor and Pidge's father was thrilling, and while I knew something would go wrong, I didn't think they'd use a hologram of the father. The fight between Pidge and crew against the Space Osiris Angels was also very thrilling, and the family reunion was touching. Then the episode got even better with Lotor's fight against Sarkon, which didn't go like I expected at all. I was shocked to find out that Sarkon died, even long before the show would end. He was the big bad after all, like Ozai from Avatar The Last Airbender, who got defeated in the very last episode of that show, so I found this twist pretty unique. It's not like I cared much for Sarkon anyway, and Lothar was a great villain to replace him. By the way, the directing in this episode was phenomenal, and some of the shots, especially Lothar standing victorious against Sarkon, was beautiful. Number 2. Attack on Titan Season 3. I considered putting Attack on Titan in third because this is only the first half of Season 3, but I'd say it was good enough to be put above Voltron that loses because of its weaker final seasons. This season had the least amount of action, but I think that's fine because the political aspects were really interesting, and when the action did appear, it was incredible. There were a lot of things answered this season, for example what happened to Eren's dad, more backstory for Levi and Erwin, and how certain Titan abilities work. There was great character development for Levi and Eren, and especially Historia, who I used to not like very much, but now she's in my top 10 AOT characters. All that being said, it's still my least favorite season, but the second half might change that, because returning to Shiganshina should be very exciting. My favorite character was Levi Ackerman. I actually knew his last name before the season revealed it, and what a significance that had. He received some much needed development, and his relation to Kenny Ackerman was an interesting one. Of course, he showed his absolute badassery dodging the military police while massacring the lot of them. He even let out a smile near the end, which was satisfying to see him finally do that. It's hard to say what was my favorite episode, as there were some I didn't appreciate much at first that I do now, but I'm going with the episode I initially liked the most, which was episode 7, Wish. This episode started with nice action, but the best part was Historia finally coming into her own and denying her father. That was the scene where I started liking her, and I also liked Eren in this scene. Say what you want about him, but it's understandable that he's so defeated and has such low confidence in himself after everything he's been through, and I legitimately felt bad for him. The episode also ended on a breathtaking note, with Rod Reiss transforming into a Titan himself instead of Historia. The only negative I have with this episode is the music. Okay, I did like the music that played when Historia slapped the syringe away, but it did feel out of place. What felt even more out of place was the rap song that played during the battle, which was absolutely laughable. It might work for Gurren Lagann and My Hero, but it has no place in a show like Attack on Titan. That's like adding a rap song to Full Metal Alchemist. Number 1. My Hero Academia Season 3. Wow, turns out one of the only shows I got into last year became my favorite. And it's ironic how it's a show about superheroes, because I never really got into that concept before. 2018 was definitely the year I got into that, with the Marvel movies, but most of those pale in comparison to this superhero story. The third season, although it had underwhelming moments like the recap season opener and that poorly placed movie tie-in episode, it was a strong season overall, and had incredible moments. The first half is definitely the best core of episodes this series has gotten so far, and while the second half makes me like this season less than season 2, it's only slightly so. Both seasons are incredible, and if I had watched the show in 2017, MHA would have won my top 10 that year too. I became so invested in this show that I actually started reading the manga while season 3 was airing, which I caught up with in a few weeks, which is impressive considering how long the manga is. Judging by what happens next, I can assure you that season 4 will be just as good as seasons 2 and 3. Not to knock down season 1 or anything, I still find that season great, but the show definitely got better, and will continue to get better despite some less impactful arcs. My favorite character this season was surprisingly enough Katsuki Bakugo, and that's surprising not only because this dude has always been an asshole, then again, I've found him very entertaining since season 2, and rewatching season 1 I noticed the groundwork for his development was there from the start. But it's also surprising because I adore so many other characters in the show. Deku and All Might were especially great this season, but I got a bit mad at Deku's recklessness in the Hideout Raid arc, and All Might didn't have enough screen time to warrant a position. Bakugo was not only funny this entire season, but he was also badass throughout, and I'm glad he didn't submit to villainy like many people thought he would. Even more noteworthy, his development peaked at episode 23, where he finally opened up about his feelings in his fight with Deku, and I was actually glad he defeated Deku, even though Deku is overall my favorite character. In retrospect, I didn't appreciate that episode as much as I should have, because I was focusing on the inconsistencies with the art that the second half of the season was riddled with. Its animation was still top-notch though, and the voice acting, especially from Bakugo in both Japanese and English, was wonderful. Maybe I didn't appreciate it as much because I had already read the scenes in the manga too, but rest assured I actually cried when Bakugo broke down while reading it. Bakugo has made number 1 in numerous popularity polls, which I personally don't agree with, especially since he gets a ridiculous amount of votes compared to everyone else, but I can't deny that he's an excellent character that will continue to grow on me. It's hard to determine my favorite episode of this season, as there were 3 that stood out almost equally, those being episodes 4, 11, and 23. But for initial impact, I'll have to go with episode 11, titled One for All. This episode had the biggest highlight of the show so far, that being not only All Might vs All for One, but also All Might's last stand as a hero, and what that means for hero society moving forward. Maybe it wasn't a very impressive fight, as it was mostly about overpowering one another, but the emotional impact was staggering, especially since it was broadcasted to many, including the Class 1A students we know and love. The revelation that Shigaraki is related to Nana Shimura was a good twist, and opens up for more opportunities with his character, and it was heartbreaking seeing All Might break down for the first time, but also heartwarming seeing him recover and continue fighting in the name of his master. Of course, I can't mention this episode without bringing up the glorious United States of Smash, which really is the best final Smash All Might could have done. This episode was incredible, and even though my favorite MHA episode might change, as of right now, One for All is my favorite of the show, as well as my favorite episode I saw in 2018. So, that's it for the TV shows of 2018. It wasn't that good compared to 2017, that had heavy hitters like Game of Thrones, Stranger Things, and even Samurai Jack. But I think 2019 will make up for that, as both Game of Thrones and Stranger Things will return. And while Samurai Jack is over, the Clone Wars is coming back, which is a good way to fill the void of Rebel's End. My Hero Academia and Attack on Titan will also be continuing, and I have a feeling they will be just as good, if not better. Lastly, as a gamer guy, I'm also excited for the Sly Cooper show, even though it probably won't be very good. Either way, 2019 is sounding a lot better than 2018, and might even surpass 2017. I'm Arcadon, and hopefully you'll see me next time!